Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this morning's Saturday conversation. I'm delighted to have the Reverend Nigel Coates, Canon Nigel Coates, who actually lives within spitting distance from the rectory here, just round the corner. And Nigel moved a little while ago into Fordingbridge. We'll say more about that later. But we've been long-standing friends, and he's just recently joined our team as one of our honorary associate priests in the Avon Valley churches. So lovely to have you here, Nigel.
Thank you, Gary. Very good to be with you.
We met a very long time ago. I think it was about 1987, wasn't it, when you came from Epsom to Highfield? Is that right?
Yes, that's my recollection too, Gary. I'd done a first curacy in St Martin's, Epsom, and I went to Highfield. In those days, you did two curacies, and I went there with a particular brief to be engaged with students at the university, and I was there a couple of years. And I think we met together. Were you at Maybush at that time?
Yeah, 87. Yes, that's right. I was curate of Maybush.
Yes.
And first of all, you lived just up the road from Highfield Church.
Yes.
And moved into Chetwynd, didn't you? Which presumably was when you became university chaplain. Was that the?
That's correct. Yes. The involvement with students at Highfield led to a change of job and a full-time job with students as university chaplain, and we moved to another part of Southampton. That's right.
Yeah. I mean that's sort of really where some of the children were sort of doing their growing up, wasn't it, for a few years?
That's right.
4 children who were all
children. Yes, and a number of different moves in Southampton meant that although we moved physically different houses, broadly speaking, their education was fairly continuous in the Southampton schools. So that worked well. Yeah.
It must have been a really interesting time working with students then. So we're probably in the early 90s now, aren't we, I think?
That's right, yes. I was at the university between 89 and 97. So that's right, the early 90s. I was there 8 years and loved the job. It was a most unusual, very different to parish ministry, but it gave one opportunities with students who wouldn't normally go anywhere near a church perhaps, but were prepared to be engaged with the chaplaincy, and we could meet them on their home turf, as it were.
Yeah.
So interesting job, and interesting too because it gave opportunity to work with staff who were obviously there a little bit longer, but to relate Christian faith to, or try to relate Christian faith to the disciplines that they were engaged with was a great challenge, and enjoyed it very much. Yeah.
And then that was another move. I'd forgotten about the move to South Stoneham Rectory.
Yes. Yes, that's right. Still as chaplain, but the diocese felt, and very understandably, that the house stand at South Stoneham became available through changes to the parish of Swathling, and it enabled us to start an evening service, Sunday evening at South Stoneham, which is, as you know well, is a lovely ancient Norman church. It's got some Saxon parts to it, and it was a wonderful setting for an experimental and exploratory style of service, which we called Sundays at 7, and students would come to us for tea. I think the way to students was through their stomachs, really, and they would come to the rectory at South Stoneham because of Rhoda's rock cakes and scones, and then they would use their music, and students were wonderfully musical, and you'd appreciate this. And we would practice for the service literally an hour beforehand, but such was their talent as flautists and clarinet players and pianists, we were able astonishingly quickly to draw together a service which we would have at 7, which was largely meditative and reflective in form. We had this wonderful music to draw upon, and the students themselves taking part. And we had opportunity for some very good preachers. I think you came on one occasion.
Some were good preachers, yeah.
And we would often read scripture and leave very long periods of silence for people to have their own reflection. And we would use different forms of liturgy, Tese services, and Iona services and Compline and the Book of Common Prayer, a real mix, but something the students owned and took part of. And very quickly we had congregations of, well, regularly of about 30 and sometimes up to 60. You never know who would turn up, but we had a core of very committed students. And I think for about 5 years in my time anyway, that was a flourishing service and exciting to see it start from scratch, as it were, which was
would now be called a fresh expression, wouldn't it?
Indeed. We didn't use. That's right. We didn't use those terms then, but that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. But then parish ministry called you back, and that was time to go to Fremantle.
It was time to go to Fremantle. Yes. 8 years was the maximum one could do as a chaplain in those days. It was sort of 5 years and a renewable 3 or something. Time to get stuck into parish ministry, and very pleased to go to Fremantle. And it was within Southampton, and we had many friends and family there. An opportunity to work in a very different context down by the docks. Most of the people there had either been in the Merchant Navy or had been dockers, or perhaps worked at the BAT factory. It was a very interesting place to be. It was, I think, looking back, I describe it as an urban village.
Yes.
And you'll remember Southampton as being formed really by a conglomeration of villages like Shirley and Maybush and Millbrook and Fremantle that had their own identity and then slowly became part of wider Southampton. I remember the churchwarden's husband saying to me he wasn't from around those parts, and it turned out he'd been born in Shirley, which was a mile down the road, and he meant it in all seriousness. It was a different district.
I did a funeral once from somebody, and they said, "Oh, yes, she's travelled a lot. She'd been to Portsmouth," and I was thinking all around the world. So a lot of people in Southampton have a very village sort of mentality, don't they? They belong to a place.
Indeed. So there was one woman who had never travelled out of Southampton until we took her to a service at Winchester Cathedral.
Right. Yeah.
Winchester was new ground for her. Yeah.
We had a curious link, didn't we? Because my training incumbent, who'd been at Maybush, you then followed as the rector of Fremantle, didn't you?
Yes, that's right, Ron Diss, who'd done a great job at Fremantle, and I was in danger of being compared to him, which, I was no Ron, but he had really helped the parish to grow, and there were lots of younger, committed people there in their 20s and 30s. I say a lot, a core of such people who were really keen to move on and explore what a parish church might mean and how it might minister in that context. So it was a good place to be. Yeah.
But so anyway, the next move was slightly a bigger move, as it were, in terms of geography. And in the sort of mid 2000s, if I remember rightly, there was a bit of an exodus from here to the Diocese of Southall, as it was,
yes.
Now, because there was a bishop and a dean, and also then you. I can't remember the order now of who went, but
well, you can blame me if you like, Gary, but I was the first, in fact.
Right.
Well, I say that the first bishop of Southall was actually George Ridding, who was once headmaster of Winchester. Oh. So there was a link, a historic link,
yes,
between Winchester and Southall. But unknowingly, I began the exodus from Southall to Winchester.
All the way around.
Of course, from Winchester to Southall. Yes, confusing, because in my mind I was thinking actually we did have a reverse transfer. One of our organists subsequently went to Winchester.
It's true,
as did one of our lay clerks.
Yes.
But once I'd gone to
Southall Minster is rather one place. In fact, I remember the year. I think it was 2006, because Keble Choir went there,
Yes.
at the time when we knew you'd been appointed, but before you
Yes.
moved.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's a lovely place.
It's wonderful, isn't it? I was reluctant to leave Southampton and an area I'd known for 50 years, really. And for me, going to Southall was going up north, which was ridiculous, really, because it's only just past the River Trent. And if you live in Southall, as people will know, you're referred to as someone from the East Midlands. It's not north at all. But for me, it was a big journey. And for the family, it was a big journey. But of course, the children were at an age where they were at university or beyond. So it wasn't so disruptive for them. And Rhoda and I felt this was an adventure which we were called to go on. And we were there nearly 15 years. And very different kind of experience to work in a cathedral. And I'd not been there long when the bishop went and was replaced by Paul Butler, who was Bishop of Southampton, of course. And not so very long after that, the Archdeacon of Winchester, John Gill, became the new dean.
And some people here will remember John, because of course Sue Stallard came from Burgate, his wife, and he was married in 1976 in this church, in Fordingbridge Church, and I was at the wedding.
Yeah.
Well, but so yes, so John's got Fordingbridge. Well, John's wife Sue has got Fordingbridge connections.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I didn't realise you were actually at the wedding, but they told us they'd been married in Fordingbridge. Yeah.
It's a long. I'll tell you about the wedding another time. That's not relevant to this. Yeah. And so your role, apart from being, because I think twice you were acting dean, weren't you? In the time.
That's right.
You were canon pastor when you weren't acting dean.
Yes, that's right. One period of being acting dean was really elongated because they wouldn't appoint a new dean, because it was also an interregnum for bishops, and they wouldn't appoint a new dean without a new bishop. So it went on 2 or 3 years. So that wasn't part of my plan at all. But I trust it was within the purposes of God. And I'd begun as canon pastor, as you say. So my role there was taking the services of the weddings, the baptisms, the funerals, being engaged with our local congregations, but also I was responsible for education. Canon pastor often covers a multitude of sins and is different in different places, but at Southall it meant being responsible for education and arranging lectures and sermon series and so on. So my background had been in education. I was a teacher before I was ordained, and was happy to be involved with that. So as canon pastor, that was my brief. Then 2 periods of acting dean, and then finally a role was created for me as canon chancellor, which gave a wider brief to education, and others were concerned with some of the pastoral work.
Yeah. And then towards the end, I think it's probably fair to say that the Leaves of Southall kind of took over, didn't it? So there was a big project, which is still ongoing, I think. We haven't quite finished it yet.
Indeed. So I've spent some considerable time in retirement continuing to work on the project. The Leaves of Southall, which, as Gary knows, I can talk too long about, so he will cut me short, I'm sure, if I go on too long. But in about 2010, we had a conference which was very wide-ranging, and we invited theologians, scientists, artists, and art historians to talk about, to join together and ask what the Leaves of Southall might teach us. And for those who aren't aware of them, they are an astonishing collection of stone foliage that are part of the chapter house at Southall, which is linked to the cathedral. And they're probably the best example in the country, if not in Europe, of a particular style of carving, 12th century, 13th century, which is naturalistic in form. So the leaves actually look as if they're growing out of the pillars of the stone. They look like trees. And that conference explored what we might learn from them and what we might learn from the medieval masons, which sounds a bit esoteric, but we realized that actually 13th century masons had a very profound connection to the natural world, to the creation, which was worth exploring. And the style in which they carved and the symbols they used and what the leaves stood for could actually help us think about the way we relate to the natural world now. And we realized it was something that really connected with the zeitgeist, as it were, of very significant concerns in our world today, to do with the way we treat creation, and with environmental and ecological concerns. And that conference in 2010 really got us going. And then about 5 years later, the roof started leaking in Southall Minster. And we went to the National Lottery, and who were the only game in town when you need £3 million, to say, you know, what can we do about it? And they said to us, quite rightly, roofs are boring. We're not going to give you any money unless you can make more of what you're most famous for, namely the leaves of Southall. Well, that was actually music to our ears.
Yeah.
And we were able to construct a project which put at its forefront making the leaves of Southall more accessible, heating the chapter house for the first time, lighting the chapter house for the first time, putting in a cantilever lift which enabled wheelchair users to see it, putting lighting outside the minster, developing the palace gardens, which meant they could grow every one of the 16 species that are depicted in the chapter house, and developing an educational project which, just by the way, needed the roof being repaired as well, as part of it. So we were able to reframe it in such a way that was true to our raison d'etre, but also acceptable to the National Lottery, who were very generous in supporting our appeal.
Well, you have to hope that the church,
that's how it began.
Yeah, you have to hope the church wardens of Fordingbridge aren't listening this morning, because it's very similar to here, where the roof is leaking, and it's the educational side of the church that we're going to have to be looking at to get the money to repair the roof. So it's a similar sort of story here, and we'll be looking at how we can encourage visitors to Fordingbridge Church and how we can share more of the heritage of the church with them interactively and so on.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's a wonderful opportunity, Gary. I think having seen the effect, having seen the way the congregations were galvanized, having seen the enthusiasm of people, and having seen the effect on the number of visitors, I think it's something to be encouraged.
Certainly is.
Yeah.
And then retirement beckoned, and I was very delighted when you ended up coming to Fordingbridge, because I know it wasn't the only choice at the time. But I hope you're sort of feeling settled. It's been a strange time. We've been here probably getting on for 18 months, I think now, perhaps a bit more even.
That's right, Gary. Very happy to return. We did wonder about staying in Southall in retirement, but felt in the end that, well, it was probably me rather than Rhoda. The forest had been my home for 50 years, and it was a return to roots, really. And natural history has always been part of my, and art has always been part of my interest. And I could not return, as it were.
Yeah.
And Fordingbridge, because a small market town, and Rhoda was keen we were near a small community, as I was too, and Fordingbridge fitted all those things for us. So very pleased to be here. But as you say, 18 months, it feels much shorter, and perhaps that's, I've been involved at Southall still with a project, but we haven't been of course, to be able to get to know people as we would like to have done, because most of that time we've been in lockdowns.
Yeah,
But very glad to have the church around the corner.
Great. Well, it's been really interesting to hear a little bit about your history this morning. I think you've got something for us to finish with, haven't you? You've got a Bible passage to finish.
Yes, very happy. Yes, by all means, Gary. I've mentioned the leaves, of course, and they are visual metaphors for church growth, organic ways in which we can understand our relationship to God and how we grow in God. And we discovered that the chapter house was near a baptismal pool. There's water under the chapter house itself. And what we are suggesting is that a very significant visual metaphor that was in the mind of the Masons when they built the chapter house was Psalm 1, because they carved a lot of green men, and green men, we'd rather use the term foliate heads rather than green men, were actually examples of people chewing on the word of God, actually, and when they did so, fruit came out of their mouths, fruit and leaves came out of their mouths. So the context is one, a Christian context. It's not the folklore context that Lady Raglan might have suggested. So Psalm 1 becomes extraordinarily appropriate, and I'll finish with just a couple of verses from that. Happy is the one who does not take the counsel of the wicked for a guide, or follow the path that sinners tread, or take his seat in the company of scoffers. His delight is in the law of the Lord. It is his meditation day and night. It is like a tree planted beside water channels. It yields its fruit in season, and its foliage never fades.
Thank you. And of course, we have a green man in Fordybridge as well. Thank you very much, Nigel. We're on at 10 o'clock for a service of Holy Communion from Bremer. And as you know, we're on each day at 10 o'clock for Thought for the Day or Saturday Conversation. So thank you, Nigel. See you in church soon. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Great pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gary.
Bye.